To sum it up, between the two cars, which one is more fun? It's hard to say, but if you put a gun to my head, a lot of you guys have asked me which is more fun, my ND3 Mazda Miata, that's the Club with the Brembo BBS Recaro package, or my Lotus Emira first edition with the sport chassis, 6-speed manual, the V6 supercharged engine. They're obviously two very different cars. They're both dedicated sports cars, two-seaters. Here we have front engine rear-wheel drive. In the Emira, we have mid-engine rear-wheel drive, both mated to a 6-speed manual transmission. And the question today is, which one's more fun? Now, this is probably the last video I'm filming of the Miata before we really modify it for track. I'm getting the roll bar installed next week. I've done the seat lowering bracket myself with the seat back raising kit so that the whole back of the seat raises up. But other than that, the car is totally stock. This seat lowering bracket has helped me a ton. The installation process was admittedly quite painful. It was 5.5 hours on day one. We ended up having some parts mislabeled, which hindered the process, and also some clearance issues in the first set of parts, but spoke with the manufacturer. We got new parts sent out, and then the second time we were able to install it correctly and also raise the seat back, which took us another 4.5 hours. So it was a very involved process, but now at 6'1", the car is much more comfortable. Now, the important part to keep in mind is that the seat back curvature is designed with these Recaros, and even on the base seats, is designed for a smaller body, a smaller frame. So by moving the whole seat back up vertically, the curvature here is for your thoracic spine. It's more natural to where, if you're a taller person, where your thoracic spine actually wants to curve. Previously, since this was lower, it was causing kyphosis. So if you guys think of like Quasimodo, kyphosis is the excess flexion of the thoracic spine that was due to this being too curved at too low on my back. I had very bad posture while driving. I would get mid to upper back pain, which wasn't fun. But enough of that. Ooh. We're sitting quite a bit lower. I think it's like almost 2 inches, and it makes a pretty big difference. The two cars are quite different on paper. Front engine rear wheel drive, 181 horsepower versus 400 horsepower. This weighs in right around 2,350 pounds in this spec, whereas the Lotus Emira is closer to 3,200 pounds. So this is less than 2/3 the weight of that car. But there are also some similarities and some common threads between these two cars. And the best way I can describe it is a certain level of naturalness and delicacy that you don't find in many cars unless you go with the dedicated sports car. So what I mean by that is that with this ND3, with the improved steering rack, you have improved feedback, better load up, a more natural response to the front end based on your steering input. And there's this delicacy to it that you just didn't have in the ND1 and the ND2. Now, the NC Miata did have great hydraulic steering, but because of the toe-out, toe-in behavior at the rear end, which we covered in previous videos, that caused some instability and lack of confidence at initial turn-in. The throttle response is very linear and very natural, although you have to get used to the more aggressive blip. There are no drive modes here. It's just a very pure driving experience. You have good architecture, right? Good bones, the double wishbone front, multi-link rear, a joy to use manual transmission, the 6-speed that has direct connection straight to the transmission. One of the best manual transmissions you can get in 2025, brand new. Very easy to double clutch as we did just there. Very communicative chassis, very natural. And that's the key thing here, because there are cars that are certainly faster. There are cars that are going to rip your face off with speed and performance. But they may not do so in a way that feels natural and one-to-one. So as an example, the Audi RS3 is my new poster child of the unnatural car. Very capable, very fast, very cool turbocharged 5-cylinder engine, relatively numb steering. But the biggest issue is that it has this all-wheel drive system. The engine is out in front of the front axle. And I've talked about this before. What is far more important than your front to rear weight balance is actually your polar moment of inertia, meaning where is the weight, where is the rotation point of that weight, not just how much weight is in the front and how much weight is in the rear. And with all that weight in the front of the rear axle and a front wheel drive based all-wheel drive system that only occasionally sends torque to the rear, it's inherently compromised just from a physics perspective. Let's get away from that. There we go. But what they've done is they've over-engineered. It doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel organic, it feels engineered to have some chassis playfulness. They'll send torque to the rear as needed. They'll have narrower section with tires in the rear to, again, under-tire the rear to help it feel more playful, get it to rotate. And there are different settings, but ultimately it doesn't feel right. And there's no right or wrong. Everyone has their own preferences. I just like natural one-to-one cars. But that Audi RS3, it makes me think back in my plastic surgery days. You can look at a body, right? Now this comes to the body contouring section of plastic surgery. And someone who is naturally lean and fit and they've worked for that physique, there are certain nuances, the way that the skin drapes over the muscles, the laxity to the skin, the muscle texture, any imperfections from where the liposuction may not have been as consistent, things like that. And you can very easily tell a body that was earned naturally, traditionally, the old-fashioned way, versus a body that had some body contouring done to it with liposuction. Now, maybe when you're wearing clothes, harder to tell. But when you see them shirtless, it doesn't take that skilled of an eye to tell the difference apart. And that's the sense I get with cars like the RS3. They don't feel natural. Now, when you get on the throttle and you get that throttle-induced rotation, yes, that happens, but not in a natural, linear way. It's an engineered way, not an organic way, is the best way I can describe it. A big part of how much fun you're going to drive from a vehicle also comes down to the roads you have. Now here, I'm driving this Miata on some pretty good, windy, not super smooth roads, and this is what the Miata excels at. You can even put the top down, but right now, because of audio, we're not going to do that. There'll be too much wind noise. But that lightweight nature, that delicacy to the steering, to the throttle, to the brakes, the chassis communication, the weight transfer, all those things are so natural, so one-to-one, so pure. And I used to give the car a lot of shit for not having climate control on a car that's, what, almost $40,000 MSRP as spec'd. And one of my awesome viewers mentioned that, hey, it's actually just a more analog experience. And I was like, that's a good way to reframe that. It is more analog in every single way. You don't have different modes, you don't have different automatic whatever. It is very much an analog experience. And that's something I enjoy. Now with the Emira, we're gonna hop in the Emira shortly, but the Emira gives you some of that same flavor. And what I really love about the Emira is that it is more comfortable than the Miata. Not as, I think, with a larger car, longer wheelbase, more insulated, not a convertible. The NVH isn't quite as harsh, yet it has this amazing way of giving you engagement while not beating you up. And that's a very, very rare thing. You'll see that in a few cars, and in modern day, incredibly hard to find until you really go high end, like McLarens and such. But a car that can give you the engagement and the communication and the feel and the theater and the nuance and the balance and the delicacy while not beating the shit out of you, such that you wouldn't want to daily drive it or you wouldn't want to drive it for more than an hour at a time, that is very rare. But the Emira can do that. Now the Miata is a little bit harsher and not as comfortable. Part of that is that I'm 6'1", 180 pounds. I don't quite fit in the car. The seat lowering bracket has helped, but still not perfect. Even with the seat back raising kit, it feels a lot better than stock, but if I had a proper seat that actually fit me and a proper ergonomics that fit me from the get-go, I know I would be more comfortable. And with the Emira, I can get to that position. So two very different cars with very different power levels, different experiences. The hydraulic steering in the Emira gives you much more communication than the electronic steering here. The chassis here is quite soft, in current setup, and we're going to be adding coilovers to make it feel a little bit more planted as we start taking this to the track. But in stock versus stock form, they each have relative strengths and weaknesses. But now, let's hop in the Emira, and I'll tell you how that drives in comparison. Ah, the Lotus Emira. You know, asking which one is more fun is almost like asking which one of your kids do you love more. This thing is also so much fun, so unique, so special, but in a different way to the Miata. It's obviously a larger car, it's a more exotic car, mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, Toyota 2GR FE supercharged engine, that's a V6, and with that added displacement, 3.5 liter versus the 2 liter in the Mazda, and with the supercharger, we're making 400 horsepower, more than twice than what's in the Miata. But again, this is also 3,200 pounds. So let's get into the interior. The biggest thing from an ownership experience, especially if you're a taller person, is just how much more comfortable the interior is. Because in the Miata, one thing that's weighing on me a bit more recently is just fitting in it. And now with the seat lowering kit and the seat back raising kit, I fit better. And I thought that all my problems would be solved. But at the end of the day, it's still a small cabin. And I still don't quite fully fit in there properly. And it's a little bit snug for someone who is over 6 foot. If I was heavier set, it would be even more uncomfortable. I'm 180 pounds. Whereas this car, there's no penalty. It's a nice, spacious cabin. My girlfriend has gone back and forth on saying that she prefers this versus the Miata. The Miata has a softer suspension, which she initially liked, but then I think eventually the NVH from a convertible and also the small size, and I'm kind of bumping elbows with her right there. In the Miata, that starts to weigh on you a little bit more. Whereas the Emira, it's more spacious, and it also feels more like an occasion anytime you drive it. You go on a date night in the Emira, it feels like it's an occasion. Although you could argue it may also feel somewhat like an occasion in the Miata, just not as much. Even the key, right? You got this unique key for the drivers, it says on the side, whereas my Miata key is literally identical to my Mazda CX-50 key. Still got a 6-speed manual. We have hydraulic steering rather than E-Pass. A totally unique interior, unlike anything else. Even though it has some of this Volvo switchgear. That Geely ownership. Now I went with the sport suspension, the sport chassis is what they call it. You can do that or Tour. Fixed dampers, either softer or stiffer. And I've actually driven both and I've reviewed both. But the issue with the Tour is that while it is more comfortable, more compliant, even in this sport setting, it is not too firm for a streetable sports car. I'm actually surprised that they offered two options, because this one feels totally appropriate as is right now. And I don't think you need to go softer. When you go softer, you get less response from the front end. Your inputs, there's a little bit of a delay as it sets, and it's noticeable. So, very happy I went with sport. And with prior cars like the Evora and such, they never offered that option either. And those are beautifully damped on a bumpy road. We're gonna go into sport mode here. We have 3 modes. The Miata has none. This has Tour, Sport, and Track. As you can see, it changes the exhaust valving, open or close, changes traction, and most noticeably, changes the throttle response. So I like driving in Sport most of the time. Even lower down in the RPM range, you have much more torque than in that Miata. Little double clutch there, even more natural than in the Miata. Because the throttle response, especially in Sport, it's calibrated so well. The Miata is very linear, but it's sluggish. You have to blip it harder than you think, and when you first get into the car, you'll be under blipping. Whereas here in Sport mode, it is just right. It is so natural. Not quite Porsche level natural, but the next best thing. Now steering. We have hydraulic steering, which gives us more feedback, and unfortunately, we're not on a very fun road today. I've just been so busy with work. As you guys know, I have 2 other YouTube channels, Med School Insiders and an associated business around that, and the Kevin Jabal MD channel, and then an associated business around that too. And I just don't have the time to go out to my regular review road and drive this on something windier. But I can tell you that the hydraulic steering is far more communicative than the Miata, and you know, the front end is also more direct and sharper. Both of these cars have double wishbone in the front. This has double wishbone in the back as well, whereas the Miata is multi-link. But one of the issues I have with the steering is that mid-corner load-up doesn't really happen. Now, whereas the Miata has less on-center feel, less road texture, it has greater dynamic load-up mid-corner to tell you how much grip and how hard you're pushing the front tires. This car, based on the suspension geometry, doesn't give you much of that. You get plenty of road texture and feedback, which is still fun and adds to the engagement and gives you some level of communication, but you're not getting what you want completely in terms of steering communication. In the Miata, you actually get a lower amplitude of road texture and that kind of feedback, but the mid-corner load-up is far better than this, which is interesting, right? E-Pass versus hydraulic. But apart from that, I would say just about everything else is a bit more communicative in the Lotus Emira. The brakes, the overall chassis, and especially when you swap out these seats. I did a review with some Tillet bucket seats. Oh my God, it was such money. It was incredible. A very communicative car. Now, I actually compare this car to the NA1 NSX, the first gen NSX, and we all hold that car in very high regard. It is an excellent vehicle. And when I first started driving this car, I was like, you know what? This actually reminds me of a modernized version of the NA1 NSX in terms of the vibe and the way it makes you feel as a driver. And I think my buddy Fenton from the Zygreen channel was a little bit looking at me a bit incredulous when I first said that. He's like, I don't know. And then he drove one himself, right? He drove Emira versus NSX, and you can see my comparison right up here. And he now agrees. He's like, yes, the Emira is the closest thing you can get for a new car or a newish car within the last couple of years to an NA1 NSX. And I think that's a better way to explain the difference between this and the Miata. This to the NSX is not an exact one-to-one, but in terms of the driving character, the vibe, the balance, the mid-engine, tight polar moment of inertia, the more streetable nature rather than track-focused nature. You know, the NA1 NSX isn't ideal on track, at least not until you go up to the Type R. I haven't driven a Type R though. I've driven various versions of modified NA1 NSXs though, and this also doesn't really thrive on track in the way that a Porsche Cayman or some other modern cars do. But where it excels is the communication and the fun factor on street, where you can, it doesn't beat you up, and yet it is very fun to drive both hard and slow. And it's hard, incredibly hard to find something like that in modern day. Incredibly rare. That's a motorcycle cop, and I'm glad I wasn't doing a pull right there. So, which is more fun? I mean, it's like two different flavors of ice cream. You like both, and that's why I own both. You know, they're awesome cars. This car, when I'm pushing it on the canyons, it's actually a bit more willing to dance because you have that additional power, and it's very responsive to weight transfer. The Miata, because you have less power, you can dance with the car, you can get a bit of rotation and such, but you have to rely a little bit more on either weight transfer, being a bit more aggressive there, or doing so on lower speed, like second gear corners. Whereas this, I've gotten the tail out, you know, going substantially faster because you have that additional power and torque. And the supercharger whine, it's just more special too in a way. Again, all these things add to this occasion, this feeling of it being more special, right? Does it feel like it's more than twice the price of the Miata? Yeah, absolutely. In terms of interior design, even, you know, it's a Lotus and the build quality isn't that of Porsche, but just like, you know, the material quality of the leathers, the actual design here. The transmission, by the way, is better than the Miata. It is a direct connection immediately above the transmission tunnel, whereas here you have cable linkages towards the back. So it's not as direct, but this is so much better than earlier examples of Lotus transmissions, both Elises and Evoras. And they've improved them. Like later year Evora GTs actually have pretty close transmissions to this, but I like transmissions that are more tight, more, you know, more crisp. And apart from having a little bit of lacking of crispness as you go into neutral, Other than that, it feels excellent. Another difference is the convertible experience, right? So some people really enjoy having the top down, and when you're driving on a canyon road, oh man, it is really something special to feel the wind in your hair, to be more connected with the outside environment, especially on a beautiful road, you know, when the weather's nice. I generally don't enjoy convertibles and use the convertible as much as maybe the average car enthusiast because, you know, from my plastic surgery days, like I'm just so concerned about skin cancer and photo aging and things like that. So I have the top up if the UV index is anything above 1. And, you know, you only want to have the top down when it's nice and warm. I think driving with the top down when it's cold is just not my thing. So I don't use the convertible as much. You also pay a price in terms of chassis rigidity. The Miata's chassis rigidity isn't amazing. Like the S2000 in comparison is a significantly more rigid chassis. You can feel some of that cowl shake and some of the limitations with the Miata. But here with the hardtop, this is aluminum extrusion, same technology from the Evora and the cars before. It is lightweight, it is stiff. Is it as lightweight as the Miata? Is it as small as the Miata? Obviously not, but we're not paying the price of a convertible in terms of chassis rigidity. Again, the cost-benefit analysis is a very personal thing, but as someone who doesn't necessarily love convertibles, it doesn't add a ton of value to me. It's only those occasional days that I use it where I'm like, oh wow, this is really nice. Most of the days I'm like, I'd prefer less NVH with the hardtop. So a very personal thing, and for me, having a convertible doesn't really add much more joy and fun to the experience. But that's, again, a very personal thing. You may feel different. I also feel like I'm now way too high in this seat. It never bothered me before, but because I lowered the seat in the Miata with that Jass seat lowering bracket by 2.2 inches, it's actually 2.25 inches, I believe, I now feel high here. And before, there was always this kind of optical illusion that you're too high because this belt line right here is lower and it curves back up here, and then also the roof line is quite low, so you feel like you're higher than you actually are, and it never bothered me before. But now, because I sit so nice and so low in the Miata, you have this added connectedness and you're closer to the car center of gravity, and it just improves the experience. The only downside is getting in and out is a little bit harder, and based on the way that the seat back lever is placed, I keep getting bruised on my butt whenever I get in. But other than that, it makes the driving experience so much better. And now I feel like I'm too high up, and it's making me lean more towards getting some aftermarket seats in the Emira, set a little bit lower, have a bit more rigidity to the seats as well, have less cushion, and sit more in the seat rather than on the seat. It's one of the issues with these OEM seats. But that would also further improve the communication to the chassis. And similar to the Miata, this just has good fundamentals. I was recently driving a BMW M340i, and those things are incredible. I think if I wanted a sedan, I would love to get one of those because they're so fun, so competent, but I would never be satisfied personally if that was my only sporty vehicle. I always want to have at least one, or at least two, dedicated sports cars in my garage, and I'm fortunate to have both the Miata and the Emira, since I have my Mazda CX-50 as my daily and my practical vehicle, and when I'm hauling random things like my new gaming PC. Shout out to Jabal and Sim Racing, the new channel. We're going to be streaming sim racing on the new rig with the 5090, new gaming PC, and the triple monitors. You can find a link to that down in the description. So when I was hauling that PC and all the boxes, having the CX-50 was so clutch, and I wouldn't be able to survive on just a sports car. But if you do have the luxury of being able to afford multiple cars, a dedicated sports car that's not compromised, you know, not some tarted up, you know, we're talking the Audi RS5 or, you know, some BMW M car. Like, no disrespect to those cars, there's just a certain level of balance, purity, and nuance and delicacy to the driving experience that you don't get unless you have good fundamentals. Like, technology and engineering can overcome many of the shortcomings with some of these vehicles and tart up an economy car or a luxury car into something that is more sporty. But just starting from the ground up, making a sports car is going to have fewer compromises in terms of driving enjoyment and experience and pleasure, regardless of the spec sheet. I do not care about the spec sheet. I care about the experience. The Miata is very slow, right? The Emira, compared to other cars at 100K, is also nothing to write home about. It's on the slower side. But that's not the point. I care about the experience and the fun factor and the way that the car elicits emotions from the driver. And that's something that's far more likely to occur in a dedicated sports car. And if you feel differently, that's okay. I'm not trying to gatekeep and say, hey, if you don't have a real sports car, you're not a true car enthusiast. No. You can still be a true car enthusiast. I'm just saying what I find most enjoyable when it comes to being a driver and dancing with the car at the limit and the level of communication and the way that it makes you feel. I just find it highly compromised when you're driving something that is tarted up and not a dedicated sports car with good fundamentals, good bones underneath. There is a silly narrative I've seen online that says Cup 2 tires, which I spec this with, and 400 horsepower you can't enjoy on the street, and I would disagree with that. Like, you can get this car to dance with you just a little bit, and it'll actually give way to understeer even at street speeds. The first ever review I have of a Lotus Emira, I elicited some understeer, or rather I shouldn't say full on understeer, but the front end was getting light and just about to begin understeering, and I wasn't pushing it that hard. That's actually a limitation of this car, the way it is set up from factory with the factory alignment. And again, not ideal for track. When I did take it on track, it was a little bit frustrating. You have to drive around it. You have to drive it like a 911 in that way, that you really need to trail brake more and keep weight on the front end. But when you're driving on street, it challenges you. It's something that keeps you engaged. Anyway, my friends, to sum it up, between the two cars, which one is more fun? It's hard to say, but if you put a gun to my head, I'd have to say the Lotus Emira, because it feels more special. Overall, it's more communicative. I'm more comfortable when I'm driving it. It feels like an occasion anytime I get behind the wheel. And even though I'm on these less optimal roads, not as fun right now driving on this road versus, you know, the windier roads that I like to be on, it is so fun, both slow and fast. And that's truly unique, truly special in modern day, to find a vehicle that can toe that line and not punish you with NVH, but can keep you relatively comfortable and still be engaging and fun, both when you're not pushing it and when you're just puttering around town. And the Miata, I love the Miata, but I don't fit in it as well. And it's personally a car that I enjoy more when I'm pushing it. When I'm driving it slow, unless I have the top down, it's not as fun and as engaging as the Lotus Emira. Hope you guys found that useful. And if you have any questions, leave them down below. Much love, my friends, and I'll see you all in the next one.